The Lakers blew out the Warriors last night, but as the trade deadline approaches, are there roster tweaks coming? I asked LeBron about what it's like to live through trade season last night. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Teams are always just trying to figure out a way how to get better, especially the ones that believe they can make a run for a championship. So that's the way it's always been not always, but for the last, 5 to 7 years, 10 years of my career with the trade deadline and the buyouts and things of that nature. So it's 10 days. There's going to happen really fast, so we see what happens over the next 10 days.
So, Dave, look, it's changed. When he said, for the last 5 or 10 years, when LeBron started trade season, transactions were not as crazy, but they are crazy now.
Yes,
so who are the top trade and buyout candidates for the Lakers as we approach this March 25th deadline?
Well, I'll start by saying, based on the Lakers roster construction and where they're going to be at salary cap wise, it's going to be most likely buyout candidates over trade targets for the Lakers, because if they were to do away with some of their young talent in order to pursue a trade, they're going to be in a tough situation this summer moving forward. But let's start with 3 names. Andre Drummond of the Cleveland Cavaliers, who's been parked on the bench for about a month now as they try to pursue trade targets. And I'm hearing that the Cavs are receiving interest in them, but because he has such a high salary number, it's going to probably be tough for them. Perhaps need a 3-team scenario in order to get that trade. Otherwise, it would be a buyout. Let's go to J.J. Redick of the Pelicans, whose shooting percentage is down a little bit this year, only shooting 36% from 3, but he's one of the true pure shooters in the game, and someone, at this stage of his career, trying to get that championship. Last year was the first year of his career he missed the playoffs. And we don't know how much time he has left, and we'll see if he gets dislodged from the Pelicans, because he is not one of those guys that's been parked yet like some of these other guys. The other guy, P.J. Tucker, who was such a vital piece on those Houston Rockets teams that knocked on the door of making the finals and upsetting the Golden State Warriors. Toughness, grit, corner three-point shooting, playoff experience, and there's going to be a bunch of suitors for him as well. There already are.
Yes.
The Rockets are receiving a lot of interest. Those are the names I would start with at the top of the Lakers list.
Yeah, Tucker is going to be a trade, not a buyout for sure. As Dave points out, there's lots of interest. The name that I like there is Andre Drummond. I think Andre Drummond has become underrated because he's been sort of pigeonholed as this empty stat stuffer guy, empty calorie stats. And I think some of that criticism has been fair at times, but the stats have meaning. It's not just the points and rebounds. He gets a ton of steals for a center, which is really valuable. And if you put a guy like that with LeBron James, he's going to look 20% better immediately, rolling to the rim, dunking, getting offensive rebounds. He's the kind of vertical threat that LeBron really likes that they do not have this year with Marc Gasol and Montrezl Harrell as their centers. I think he'd be great for the Lakers. And I agree with Dave. I think the Cavs could make an Andre Drummond trade right now. I just don't think it's a trade that they particularly want to make. I don't think they've gotten an offer that is to their liking. I think it's more bad money coming back to them, not a lot of assets. So if it gets to buyout territory, I really like the Andre Drummond fit with the Lakers. I think he's become underrated.
I agree. And look, the Lakers need a dynamic roller and a shot blocker. And if they can't get Andre Drummond, I would look into bringing back JaVale McGee. LeBron James and the rest of some of the Lakers are very familiar with him. He's familiar with the organization. He's what they're missing in that centerpiece. We all know that LeBron loves spacing. He would love to have a guy like J.J. Redick. And I know J.J. Redick's shooting percentage is down, but sometimes a change of scenery will change that. And knowing that he's playing on a contender, because KCP hasn't been consistent this year, and we know that he elevated his game last year, but just having a guy like J.J. Redick on the court, even if he don't touch the ball, is a huge decoy and can open up the paint for LeBron James, Anthony Davis when he comes back, and Dennis Schroder going downhill, because now the paint is wide open. You have a dynamic roller. If you could add a guy like JaVale McGee, low risk for high reward, you won't have to pay him much because he'll be on the vet minimum if the Cavs buy him out.
Yeah, Park, certainly JaVale McGee is someone who was well-liked in the Lakers organization, was one of those bodyguards along with Dwight Howard protecting Anthony Davis in his first year with the Lakers. Because they traded him to Cleveland, JaVale will actually have to end up being on another roster first before he could end up on the Lakers and be waived. Of course, the Cavs front office have been very active ever since Kobe Altman took over, and so it wouldn't surprise me if they were to work out some sort of deal to move him. And certainly Jared Allen is the center of the future with that organization. But there is another hurdle for them to jump over to be able to eventually grab McGee if he is.
Well, Dave, Dave, they know how to make things happen and make things work. It's not hard to get a third team involved and say, hey, we're going to trade JaVale. All you have to do is cut him, and then the Lakers go pick him right back up.
I do want to look at what the Lakers are dealing with, right? Because they have more than $100 million tied up in LeBron, in AD, in KCP, in Kyle Kuzma, Alex Caruso, Dennis Schroder, and Andre Drummond are all notable free agents. And Montrezl Harrell, he has a player option this summer. So, Brian, where do the Lakers go from here?
Well, they're already pretty much at the salary cap with the guys they have under contract. So any dreams that any Laker fan might have of going out and signing a big free agent, that's not going to happen. Their moves really probably are to try to bring back the players that they have and sign them to contracts that could potentially be movable later. And I know that to Laker fans, the idea of bringing back Dennis Schroder right now may not sound all that exciting, but I think they're probably seriously going to have to look at it. Richard just referenced this in a very strange set of maneuvers. It appears that Schroder took off of his IG bio that he was a Lakers point guard, then put it back on when somebody might have mentioned it to him, and then in the locker room after the game took it off again. I have no idea what to make of all of that.
You know what to make of it, Brian. You know what to make of it.
Richard,
it was childish.
He turned down a $20 million a year extension at midseason. The Lakers are going to have to make another offer, and that offer cannot be $20 million. It's going to have to be an offer that they could someday at some point trade him, but then obviously he's also unrestricted. If he doesn't like what the Lakers have to offer, he can walk to Chicago or even to Toronto or somewhere else.
Let him go. This isn't.
But Richard, they can't replace him.
I understand that. I understand that they can't replace him, but in this series, he looked very replaceable. Now, I understand that you're not going to overreact to a series, but it takes a certain mentality to win a championship. It takes a certain mentality to play with LeBron James and to go out and put out that little petty stuff. And then he puts it back up there, obviously, because he started trending on Twitter. And I'm going to say something that I know is not real. They need a third level, high level player. And I'm not saying, Drew Holiday's name has been so popular, but this is why I'm going to say this. Anthony Davis can't carry the load when LeBron James is out. LeBron James can't carry the load when AD is out. They need another player, so when AD needs a break, LeBron James has another player that he can count on. When LeBron James needs to be rested like a 37-year-old superstar who has the most minutes in NBA history, Anthony Davis needs another person he can count on. Now, everybody was hoping that was Dennis Schroder, but it's obviously not. It's obviously not. So they need to find a third player that can pair with those guys when the other one is out, because that is what's the future is going to look like.
I mean, it must going to rain outside or the sun is out or whatever the case may be, because I agree with RJ. They need a third option type guy. They need a guy that could go out there and get his own. But I'm going to say this, okay? But they do have to move some pieces. Maybe try to get off a Kyle Kuzma contract and trade him and get something valuable back. Or maybe even try to sign and trade Dennis Schroder to the people out there that do have interest in signing him or acquiring him. But at the end of the day, Richard was right. And Brian, you know this Rachel, you also know this as well. Playing alongside LeBron James comes a different type of pressure. And if you don't have that mentality and you don't have that dog in you, that sense of urgency or that mental toughness, it's not going to work. So it looks gravy from the outside, but until you get in that locker room until you start getting all that media attention and everything else, you don't understand the pressure that comes alongside playing with LeBron James, especially in a Lakers uniform.
Look, now, Kendrick, I'm fanning myself because I have witnessed a miracle in church today. You and